for you all. We'll start at the beginning, though, not at the end. I'm going to do the sectional that one of the sectionals that I led at this conference called Love to the Loveless, How the Divine Service Cares for Those with Mental Illness. And so kind of what this is, or what my purpose behind doing this is to paint a very broad picture of what mental illness is, just kind of very, very broadly, and then to talk a little bit about what happens in the divine service in the liturgy, and I think we can even broaden that a little bit more and say in the church, and then look at how these two things kind of mesh together and why. So that's what we're going to do for the next 40 minutes or 45 minutes, something along the way. Okay? All right. Good. So what is mental illness? When you hear the word mental illness, what pops into your head? Kind of what? Just play word association with me for a second. Ben, crazy. All right, you bet. Bill. Bipolar, schizophrenia. Sure. Emma. Depression, my favorite. Yes. Human. Yeah. Human. Absolutely. What else? Sickness in the brain. Sick in the head. Anxiety. Yep. It's good. What else? Weakness. Ah, that's an interesting one. Weakness. What else? Disorder. Yeah, there are a few words that we kind of associate with mental illness, and I think disorder is one of them. That kind of gives you a little picture, doesn't it? If we say disorder, that means that this is the opposite of order. So oftentimes when we think about mental illness, we're really talking about the brain, and I'll say our lives are ordered typically in a certain way. We have certain expectations of how we think, how we feel, what our behavior is, and how other people think, feel, and behave. And that order is interrupted somehow. And how it is interrupted or messed up is going to vary quite widely. And Coping, yeah. So a lot of times when you talk about mental illness, and I think you could maybe compare this to chronic illness of any kind, back problem or whatever. In a mental illness or chronic illness, a part of what you're doing is trying to think about and figure out healing. But a lot of times what you're doing and thinking and dealing with is, how do I just get through the next day? Or the next hour, or the next minute. So it becomes a matter of, all right, how do I continue to function in the middle of this? And then
Threatening or unsafe.
Threatening or unsafe, absolutely. Just about every single time you will see some sort of mass violence, shooting or event, it is attributed to one of two things. Either some kind of Muslim or Islamic extremism, or mental illness. Just about every time. Or guns. I'm not going there. Don't even think I will. So that question of is mental illness, having a mental illness, mean that someone is unsafe or even dangerous, is definitely a part of our kind of common thought process today. Yeah, was there another hand? Rick? Outcast, yeah, outcast. I think the word stigma could sort of fit with that. We could toss a few other fun words in there, like isolated, separated, not a part of the group. Well, and then you have abnormal. That's actually an interesting one. You remember back in May, I went to spoke at that mental health seminar thingy in St. Louis. And one of the other speakers, the example that they used was, and I know some of you guys are really going to like this, so I just need to do it. Use the example of having a cute butterfly tattoo on your ankle would be considered normal, right? That's not something anyone would think of as good or bad today. If your entire body is covered in tattoos head to toe, and you have bone implants in your forehead, that would probably be considered what? Abnormal, right? And so what is the difference between the butterfly tattoo on your ankle and the bone implants? Well, it's not a switch, is it? It's not a one or the other. It's a scale. It's a continuum. And in fact, if you're in rural Nebraska, you may have the scale may be in one place. If you're in downtown San Francisco, the scale may be very different, right? So normal and abnormal are not always the same thing. And we're only talking about in our country here. Never mind going abroad. So normal and abnormal are kind of a scale. Those are terms. Definitely we kind of, again, just plain word association with mental illness here, very common. Yes?
It's not something you can always see.
Say that one more time.
It's not something you can always see.
Yeah, not something you can see. That's right. If I have a broken arm or a broken leg, it's relatively clear on what the treatment is and that there's something wrong. If I have a broken leg, you're probably not going to ask me to run up the stairs and get you something, right? But if I have a broken brain, that's not so common, right? So it's just not as easy to define expectations along the way. Larry?
Well, as you spoke earlier, my mind caught on, you said Muslim extremists. And
Yeah.
it struck to me that it's not just Muslims.
Of course not.
It's the idea of extreme.
Of extremism,
It's
you bet.
extreme sports, it's extreme this.
Extreme anything. You bet. You bet that any kind of behavior taken to the nth degree can become extremism and is going to be viewed as abnormal, possibly dangerous. Okay? Any other just kind of, I mean, we're just doing a big splatter talk here. Yeah, Paul. Unpredictable. You bet. That brings us back to our order-disorder thing there, right? I don't know about you, but I like at least certain things in my life to be ordered. And when my life becomes less ordered, the word children comes to mind. When my life becomes less ordered, then things are unpredictable, they're out of control. And so whether I'm talking about regulating my sleep and wake, or whether I want to make sure that every pencil is lined up just right, you know, I'm going to try to exercise control or order in some part of my life along the way. So that, but we're definitely talking about kind of the range here. Barbara.
If you see someone with a broken leg and they have a cast on, you feel comfortable talking to them about it. You might ask them about it. If
Sure.
you see someone that is acting out of character,
Yep.
or they seem depressed or something,
Right.
you're very hesitant to say one word to them.
Right, because you don't know what to do or how they're going to react or whether it will help or make it worse. And by the way, what we're talking about here, as we're kind of thinking about these things, in many respects would apply to developmental disabilities just as much as it would mental illness. Maybe, you know, not 100%, but especially isolation, unpredictability, you know, awkward social interactions, many of these things. So when we're talking about developmental disabilities, our kind of collectively as a society, our ability to know how to meaningfully interact is very tricky. It's very difficult along
That's
the
because
way.
you can't fix it. Like
Right.
you can fix a broken leg, but you can't always fix it.
No, really hard to fix a broken brain. And again, the mind is so tremendously complex and multifaceted that it is not an easy fix. And so when I look at something that is an unsolvable problem, I tend to want to kind of look away and look somewhere else, you know, something else that I can fix. You know, I can't fix this behavior in someone but I can make sure that my workbench has everything at right angles to each other. Or what? Yeah. Dennis, did you have that? No? Okay. Yeah, there. And
You
then,
said you looked away. I wonder, is that the right thing to do?
we're not talking about what we should do at all yet. We're just describing what we
Okay,
do.
because I'm trying to,
Yep, absolutely.
just kind of the job is.
Yep.
Look squarely at it and accept.
Yep, that's right. And that is always one of our challenges, I would say, as human beings, is conflict avoidance, which is very simple. Yeah. Rick and then Tina.
I guess through this discussion, some people have touched upon it. You know, it's interesting that this whole issue, the way society's dealt with it, for example, I'm thinking movies, Psycho. I mean, we often are so enamored with this, but look, no problem making fun of these people because we're afraid of them, we don't know them.
That's right.
I mean, great movies. Think of all the great movies that
All right.
are based on mental illness.
Psycho, Rain Man, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, right, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. You bet. Absolutely. And of course, our human tendency always, when there's something we don't understand, and which means that we're possibly afraid of it, our tendency is always going to be to either dehumanize or create some kind of a barrier along the way, so that it is clear that whatever is going on, I don't have their problem. So I'm better than them in some capacity. Tina, and then Diane. Shame, another interesting one, very closely connected to stigma. Is that idea that I have a mental illness, I have a weakness, maybe even a moral failure. I mean, I can't even count how many times I've heard variants of, you know, you're depressed. The reason you're depressed is because you don't have enough faith. So if you had more faith and you believed in it hard enough, then all of your problems would go away. It's very, very common. And because I don't have enough faith, now I not only have my mental illness, now I also have shame, where I feel like I am isolated from the people around me. I have no place with them. They have no place with me. I don't belong. So there's another good concept. Diane.
There was an article in the paper today about a relatively young man who was shot. He had schizophrenia.
Right?
It was late development. He had been a contractor, member of the church,
Sure.
member of the community. And,
Normal.
But his family, people outside the family could find no way to help him because of the way California laws are set up. So
Sure.
he was out there with no ability.
No capacity in himself, and where the people that otherwise would be caring for him, I mean, again, you're dealing with such a big, hairy problem. I mean, and it just is. It is such a big, hairy problem that how to even approach it is just not, there's no simple answer to that question. And it's very easy to kind of cast blame or aspersions on other people. Now, I know that there are other hands and thoughts, and we could talk about this until cows come home. I'm going to keep moving, whether you want me to or not. This is the Mayo Clinic's definition of mental illness. I think it's worth just spending a minute on. Mental illness refers to a wide range of mental health conditions. Disorders, there's that word, disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. Examples of mental illness include depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and addictive behaviors. Many people have mental health concerns from time to time, but a mental health concern becomes a mental illness when ongoing signs and symptoms cause frequent stress and affect your ability to function. So, a couple things to notice in this definition. First of all, is mood, thinking, and behavior. So, how we feel, how we think, and what we do. Okay? And one of the characteristics of a disorder is that you may have, if I have a broken leg, what's the What's the symptom? Well, the symptom is that my leg is broken, is that the bone is broken. That's what it means to have a broken leg. Whereas if you're talking about a disorder, there may be 25 symptoms, and you may have 6 of them. Then the next week, you may have a different 6 of them, or none, or all of them. And it may change over and over and over again. So it is absolutely a moving target to kind of try to nail down. This is why mental illness and let's say behavioral disorders are so hard to diagnose and they're so hard to treat. Is because they don't stay put. If my leg is broken, it's going to stay broken, and it's going to eventually. The healing is kind of a straight path, more or less. But with disorders, healing does not have a clear path. It just doesn't.
Isn't part of that just that our science isn't there yet? I mean, we're in
Sure.
the dark ages,
Sure.
well.
Yeah, our science isn't there yet. And I think I would add that that our society's ability to kind of meaningfully understand normal, abnormal, and to care for the loveless, as our society kind of continues to lose its sense of compassion and humanity, that for all of our great talk about being caring, that will continue to be lost, I would say, or will become harder and harder and harder to kind of wrap our brains around what it means. So a couple other things in here. We talked about that word disorder. We talked about the word behavior. A lot of times when you talk about mental illness, what people really are thinking is, how do I get this person to behave in a way that is going to make them fit in and be normal? Okay, that's just kind of how, and so we want to sort of compact people into a certain societal box so that they will fit in and won't kind of mess things up or mess people up. And so that can kind of, and so very often we will focus on behaviors which never get to mood or thinking. And notice that this definition, of course, doesn't say anything about the soul or the spirit or faith at all. I mean, this is male question. I don't expect them to, nor do I want them to, because they'd probably mess it up. Yeah, Rick.
Just a quick thought, I don't put on the rabbit hole. It occurs to me, the first word disorder up there, take that away, and doesn't advertising fit right there?
Yeah.
Affect your mood, thinking?
Sure. I mean, this is kind of, and that's why I'm highlighting these things, is that in many respects, what we're talking about here is humanity. We're not really talking about a mental illness apart from anybody else or anything else. Because all of us, every one of us, this is what it means to be human. We have things that affect our thinking, our mood, our feeling, and our behavior, right? And there may be 1,000 things that affect that. That could be advertising, that could be diet, that could be exercise, that could be, who I hang out with. There are anything, almost, that is going to affect our mood, thinking, and behavior. But when we kind of talk about mental illness, what we're really talking about is a mood, thinking, and behavior that goes outside of societal norms. Okay? And I'm not, and please don't mishear me here, I'm not saying this to be dismissive at all, but simply so that we can kind of start to understand how this fits and works in our world. I have a book that I will recommend to you all. I'll try to bring the picture of the book cover next week. The name of the book is The Burden of Sympathy, How Families Cope with Mental Illness. That's written by a sociologist. It's not a Christian book. I think he's a Harvard researcher, if I recall. But what he does is simply examine the question of how do families, child, parent, whatever it is, how do families kind of understand mental illness and then in turn try to deal with it in some capacity or another. And it's a brilliant, brilliant book, probably 20 years old, but I've never seen anything that's better than that. And I definitely recommend it for people who have a family member or someone close to them that struggles with mental illness, because I think it's super helpful. Kind of just to understand, why am I feeling this way? Why is this one thing, which doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, all of a sudden turn our entire family completely on its ear? Really, really interesting book. Notice too, in the last part here, that, at least in the Mayo Clinic's definition, that they make a distinction between mental health concerns and mental illness. What's the difference between the two?
One sticks on it.
Yeah, one is enduring. One is much more fluid. Happens from time to time. Everybody, absolutely everybody, has mental health concerns at different times, right? This could be seasonal affective disorder. This could be stress at work or at home or school. I mean, everybody, all of us. This is, again, a part of what it means to be human. Typically speaking, when we talk about mental illness, we're talking about something that is persistent, that doesn't go away. How it expresses itself may change, but this has a kind of a persistence to it. All right, there's our 20-minute kind of blast on mental illness. Let's get to the next question. This is a nifty word tag, because I'm a word nerd. Can't help it. Of what people who are 30 years old think of when they ask that question. What is mental illness? What are the words that kind of, what's the word association? And many of them we have, of course, talked about, right? Depression, disorder, bipolar. We haven't mentioned OCD or PTSD, I don't think. We could add personality, sleep, sadness. I mean, there's addiction, anxiety, lots of things in there. And it's really some of these smaller ones that are almost more interesting. Relationships, procrastination, insecurity, disassociation, trauma, paranoia, drugs, stress, insomnia, borderline weight, loneliness. It's a really interesting kind of picture of what do people think of when they think of the term mental illness. Rod.
Fellow by Dr. Pearl did a lot of work in this area some years ago. And when you look at all these words here, you have to ask yourself the opposite. Who is psychologically healthy?
Right. That's right.
And the fact is that when you try to define the opposite of this, purely psychologically healthy, very few people fall into that.
Very few people will fall into that category.
Everybody
That's
in
right.
the population, to
Right.
some degree or another, is dealing with some or multiple of those.
And that's why I think it's important for us to kind of have this concept of normal, abnormal in our heads. Is because normal and abnormal is a cultural phenomenon, right? That is not a medical diagnosis. That is not a spiritual diagnosis. That is a cultural phenomenon. And that doesn't, and it's a helpful cultural phenomenon. This is not, it's not good or bad, but to understand that, just for example, I was thinking about this during the offertory at first service after my sermon, because pastors. And what I was thinking of was, I wonder if there's anything in our society that really is trying to get people to be constantly searching for and wanting to have more stuff. And sort of looking, and I don't just mean sort of greed generally, but what are common behaviors or things that kind of happen now that push us toward thinking that the accumulation of stuff is what is normal? Your advertising? I was thinking Pokemon. Pokemon Go. The whole point there is the accumulation of stuff. Now, it may be silly digital stuff, but it is, nevertheless, kind of what is it teaching? Getting more stuff means that I am right. So it's just an interesting idea. Walt and then Don.
Well, it's like the American way, right?
Yeah.
We hard work, self-denial, and get stuff.
Get stuff. You bet. So, and that is in our culture normal, right? But I'm not saying good. Don't mishear me here. I'm saying normal. There's a difference. Don.
Rejection and ultimate joy.
Yeah. I think rejection and stigma kind of go together. You think of the story of the 12 lepers. I'm lepers. Of that if you're a leper in first century Israel, you've got to wear certain clothes. You've got to have what essentially is a cowbell that you ring. Unclean. That seems like that would put you outside of the norm. I'm not sure, but that would very much set you up to say, I am abnormal. So yeah, that is the whole point of which is, I am not a part of this. I don't belong. I am isolated. Now, one other thought for you to just kind of keep in your head with this. The biblical word that we associate with the concept of isolation or separation. What is it?
Sin.
Sin! You bet. And so, very often, what we do, and again, I think this is kind of Western culture thought process. The reason that someone is isolated and separated from the group is what? Because they're a sinner. That's why someone is isolated. I can only do that. The reason that someone is isolated and separated in Western society, at least, is because we presume moral failure, sin. Okay? So just kind of keep those thoughts in your head. Dennis.
It's hard to look at this as a disorder. We tend to want to lump the person into the disorder as this is them.
Yes.
It's hard to separate their personhood from their disorder.
Thinking back to that conference I spoke at, one of the other speakers I think had a brilliant observation about how we talk about certain diseases, okay, and that certain diseases we have a tendency to identify with the person, and then other diseases we would never identify with the person because again of that normal abnormal scale. So to take one, my wife's brother has diabetes, and I remember having a conversation with him once about how he did not like to be called a diabetic because he is not the disease. That does not identify him, right? We would never call someone, you would never introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Todd, I'm a canceretic. Why? Because cancer is a god-awful disease that kills and is nasty and nobody wants to be associated with cancer. I want to be as far away from cancer as I can. But diabetes is okay. Right. And so there may be also a little bit of shame kind of stuff put on that. But and you can think of all sorts of different diseases that would fit into that. And so one of the things that I would like to kind of get into your head with this is thinking about, I don't want to dehumanize another person and make them into anything less than their true identity, which is beloved by God, child of God, human, because those mean the same thing. And so whenever I kind of identify a person with a thing, especially if it is a social, it's sort of tied to social stigma. And we can do this in lots of different ways. We can do this with disease, we can do this with race, we can do this with economic status. That person is poor. That person is rich. And in both of those cases, they are now defined by what? By their stuff or lack of stuff. And in neither case is that the person. The person is not rich or poor. The person is human. They have a name. They have an identity. This is, I think, tremendously important when we view people kind of across the board. This is especially true when we talk about the church and our life together under God. Is that whenever I am doing things, when my behavior, intentionally or unintentionally, when my behavior, the purpose that it is serving is to dehumanize someone. I'm going to go on a limb and say that's probably not a good idea. And we do it all the time. All the time. In many various ways. Larry.
I'm having a hard time reconciling what maybe I learned either long ago in the Lutheran church,
Sure.
or maybe it was secular through my education. I don't know. Is it starts off with the premises: Adam and Eve's original sin shatters the world. It shatters the world so much. Even my DNA, everything about me has been shattered. And the worst punishment is being separated from God. So this becomes all these things up there. All of us are held together by being a sinner in all these different things.
Yeah.
Now I'm having a hard time with what you said a few minutes ago, that we're children of God, and
you're kind of nailing the very tension that exists for every one of us as a human being. And that is that I go to church and, we have an opening hymn, but the beginning of the service starts with, I, a poor, miserable sinner. So I am identifying myself with this, right? So I understand completely the tension here. And this is why these words are so powerful. It's because they are identity words. I'm not simply saying I have a sin. This is saying I am a sinner. This has permeated me. Okay? But that is not the end of that conversation. And that is the whole point. Is that if I end there, then I am in big trouble. But I can't end there. That is what the forgiveness of sins does. Is, as far as the east is from the west, so far has your sin been removed from you. That is the exact point of forgiveness and all of this identity talk, is that I am not defined by my sin. I am defined by my Savior. And that is the exact angst that we deal with. I had an argument with the guy that I did the podcast with, Professor Stigmeyer, about this once, because he really hates this language. And he wants to change it to, I am in bondage to sin. And the reason is because of this identity talk that we're talking about. That sin does not define me. I am enslaved to sin. I am in bondage to sin, but I am not sin. I mean, this would be his argument, and I haven't bought it, but I definitely understand it, and even sympathize with what that struggle is. All right, I'm gonna move on here, because I think that we have kind of circled around this question a fair amount here in our talk about this. And we'll get to it more. But let's ask this question. Why would all of this, mental illness stuff, why would this make going to church hard?
When you're stuck in the disorder, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So that concept of being stuck.
And we get involved in someplace that might help you.
Sure. Judgment. Shame. What else? Emma?
Constantly being reminded of it.
Yeah. It could be a reminder. Guilt. You bet. And again, if you have come, true or false, if your feeling is that this is simply my fault, and my going to church is going to constantly remind me of that, going to church sounds like a terrible place to go. Right? Ben?
Social situations are extremely demanding.
Yeah, social, and again, I mean, we would associate that with anxiety. That's kind of the term that we
Which
sort
is
of.
the expectation of normal.
Right, and that expectation of normal social anxiety. I've probably told this to you guys before. When my depression, that obviously is my lens through which I understand mental illness, is depression, or how I experience, I guess I should say. When my depression is at its worst, its hardest, what do you think is the hardest thing for me to do on Sunday morning? Nope. Preaching's easy.
Stand up back in church.
Shaking everybody's hand after church. Just shoot me now. And I love you guys. That is not the point. The point is that is by far, nothing else even comes close. That is by far the hardest thing for me when I'm struggling, because my brain, and it's important to think about, when we talk about mental illness, we can kind of talk very broadly about processing, okay? That your brain's ability to process information is messed up in some way or another. How it's messed up is going to depend on the disorder, disease, etc. So when my depression brain is at work, my ability to process input is not working right because the dopamine levels in my system are not being regulated correctly. And so I'm gonna be like a big baby. Don't take that wrong. I'm gonna be like a big baby in the sense that when our children were small, and you're at that, the stage when they don't want to sleep when you want to sleep, they're teething or wanting to eat or poop or do whatever kids do. The parents kind of desperately try to find what is it that I can do to get this little monster to sleep. And for us, it was the vacuum. You get enough noise going, and the baby brain is going to go, too much input. Right? That's what happens. And maybe it's the vacuum, maybe it's the blender, maybe it's the TV, maybe it's AC/DC. I don't know, whatever. But that's kind of how we sort of deal with input, is that at some point, for all of us, our ability to process information is at an end. And so you are going to shut down somehow. Okay? Everybody with me? So, when you talk about a social situation like church, and you're talking about mental illness, the ability to, the energy that it takes to look normal, act normal, interact like a normal human being, look like all of these other people that are around me, when I know in my own head that I am utterly screwed up and should just be sitting in a rubber room, well, that means that this context is tremendously hard. Almost unbelievably hard. Because there are all of these things going into place that say, you don't belong there. This is not for you. Whatever this is. And so the amount of energy that it takes to to put on this show. And of course, we all have masks that we wear, right? You know, you've got your work mask, you've got your home mask, you've got, we all have different masks that we wear to do different things. And those masks take mental and emotional energy to maintain. Sometimes the energy isn't there. And so it's also very common when someone struggles with a mental illness that they will isolate themselves because they're spending all their energy trying to act normal, whatever their perception of normal might be. And as a result, they can't enter into this social situation. So one of the things that I very often, and again, very concretely, one of the things I will encourage people, if I'm having a very into this conversation, which I have remarkably often, one of the things I'll say is, come late, leave early. Just cut out the social situation. Obviously, the community wants you to be a part of it, but it's more important that you receive the gifts of God than you act nice. Seriously. And so, come late, leave early. God knows. It's okay. And we, as a community, also have to give the people the freedom to come late, leave early, or to come and go as they need to, and to not left sinners. And if we kind of create this judgment sense, just in the words of the hymn, let it go. Here.
Going back to your mask thing, don't you find something putting on a mask on purpose?
Of course, we all do. We all put on masks, intentionally and unintentionally at different times.
They're mentally ill.
Well, and I think that for mental illness, you might be more aware of how much work it is to put on a mask. All of us do it. All of us do it. You don't act on Sunday morning like you act if you're at a baseball game. That doesn't mean that one's right and the other's wrong. It means it's a different situation and you're going to behave differently, and that's okay. That's not bad. But a part of what we as a community have to do is give people the latitude to, slip off the mask every so often. Give people the freedom to be weak and to come late and leave early, or come for the sacrament half because the sermon is too exhausting, or whatever. Kind of give people, just let them breathe. Ben?
I don't like the term mask because it feels deceptive or sounds deceptive. I would almost say just the energy it takes to behave appropriately.
Sure. And the reason and I get that, because behaving differently does not mean lying. Okay? I totally agree. The reason I use the word mask is because that's a word that Luther uses to talk about vocation. That God masks himself and uses other people to serve you. So Luther will talk about that God masks himself behind a doctor. So that when the doctor is healing you, it's actually God that's healing you. That's kind of why I use the word mask. But I understand that the intention is not deception. It's kind of emotional energy to behave in a certain way in a certain context. Okay. Great.
I think that as parents, friends, neighbors, whatever the situation, that you have somebody who's depressed or whatever they're...
Right, whatever it is.
The first thing you want to tell them is go to church and get right with God and everything else will be fine.
Sure, because that's going to fix it.
Yeah, you're going to get struck by lightning, but that's not the only way it's going to happen.
Right.
You got to have all these other things that go with it.
And we, again, as human beings, have to learn how to act in compassion toward another, and not simply to act in judgment toward another.
Right, and when we act in judgment, who's sin is sin. then
Right, yeah, and that's difficult, and yeah, I'll leave that at that. Nicole?
I just have more of a comment, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that mental illness is not a choice.
Right.
It's not a choice, and you can't compare your experience with somebody else's experience.
Absolutely.
Because of your experience, you started to eat healthy, went to yoga,
Right.
did a walk every day, and that worked.
Right, and then it was all fixed.
And then it's all fixed, that's great, but that's not going to help the
No,
other
that's right.
person.
And that's a part of, I would call that a part of our sort of growing understanding of humanity. As a human being, I don't have to be you in order to have sympathy and compassion. I can recognize that whatever it is that you're struggling with, dealing with, etc., is yours, and it's not the same as mine. But that it is a struggle, and that I can't, and that I'm neither a doctor nor the son of a doctor, or a psychologist, or I can't simply fix other people. But that is very often because all we see, when you think of the list of 25 symptoms of the disorder, because I see those, I figure if I can get this, this one behavior licked, or if I can get them to get this one behavior licked, then their problem is going to be solved. Which is, first of all, ridiculously arrogant on our part. To think that I can just sort of sit and say, okay, well, if you just stop ticking your head, then all of your problems are going to get fixed. No. No, it's not how it works. It's not. All right, I'm going to go on a little bit. I know there's much more we can talk about, but I want to at least start to talk about this a little bit, and we'll obviously have to continue this next week. We talk about worship a lot around here, but just to kind of get a very high 50,000-foot view of what happens in the divine service, in the liturgy. God is at work serving his people. That's our nifty German word, Gottesdienst, God's service. That's why we call it divine service. God is at work serving his people. So the orientation is God's doing stuff for me, not simply I'm doing stuff for God. I kind of get that basic orientation, and it's not an either or. It's not like I don't serve and praise and thanksgiving, etc. That's not the point. But the basic premise, for Lutheran worship at least, is God's doing stuff for me. Forgiving my sins, giving me life and salvation, drawing me into his presence, etc. So Jesus, in turn, delivers himself. That's what happens in the divine service. And I want to end with this one because I think it is really central to understanding where and how people with mental illness can fit. Okay? I had a professor in seminary named Arthur Just. I know that a few of you know him. He's been here many times, right? And some of you may have heard his description of liturgy, kind of where this came from. But I'll give it to you because you probably don't remember. In the New Testament, when the Christians gathered together for the breaking of the bread and for the hearing of the word, they had a lot of options for words that they could use. Probably the most obvious word that they could have used was the word synagogue, because that simply means to gather together. They could have used a word that was more temple associated, sacrifice or something along those lines. But they didn't use other words. They used this word, this Greek word liturgia, which we usually translate liturgy. And liturgia is just about the weirdest word that they could pick, because a liturgia is a tax. And you kind of think, I don't want to associate worship with taxes in any way, shape, or form. That don't make no sense. But the reason is a liturgia is a tax, a service that you render on behalf of the empire. So the classic example would be you are the owner of a villa outside of Rome on the Appian Way. It's a lovely villa. It has a great view. It's got some nice vineyards behind it. It's a great place. Your liturgia is to take care of your portion of the Appian Way, the road, in front of your house. And you don't do it just for yourself, although it's helpful for you to have a road. You do it on behalf of the whole, so that the army can get through, so that commerce can take place, so that all of the things that make bad smells in Rome can get out of the city, and all of this stuff. So this is your liturgy. This is your liturgia for the empire. Well, for the church, they picked this word liturgia because in the divine service, you receive the gifts of God, forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation, on behalf of the world. So there's a real subtle but important distinction that makes here. So your liturgy, your liturgia, is God serving you. And so you receive these gifts not simply for yourself. You receive them for everyone. So that your neighbor across the street benefits from your liturgy. You're receiving the forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. This enables you to serve your neighbor. And just think very concretely about those words that we often use in the liturgy. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So the eating and drinking of the cup is where we receive the forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. That is a proclamation of Jesus' death, which is really cool. So when I come to church on Sunday morning, I receive all of this stuff on behalf not only of myself, but for the whole world, for the life of the world. And that means also that when we gather here with our 97 people, or however many there are, that we are not just receiving these things for the 97 of us so that we can be so great that everybody else can go to where you know where, but we are receiving these things so that they in turn may also be saved. Okay, that's kind of Liturgy 101. And what we will do next week is we will talk about why does that matter when we talk about serving and caring for people with mental illness. So you're going to have to come back next week. It's just the way it's going to work. Let's close with the benediction. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God, the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all.